Hello, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to explore a really fascinating concept that is the literal engine driving India's future. We constantly hear about physical infrastructure, right? The new highways, the massive factories, towering skyscrapers. But today, we're going to look inward. We're going to examine how investing in people, in human minds and bodies, is actually the most powerful catalyst for the vision of Vikasit Bharat, or a developed India.
Now, I want you to really think about this for a second. Who contributes more to the economy? Is it a state-of-the-art factory machine, or is it the software engineer who wrote the code to make it run? It kind of challenges our whole perception of what capital actually means in a modern economy, doesn't it? We are so used to thinking of capital purely as money or heavy machinery. But as we transition into this knowledge-driven world, the skills, the health, and the expertise of that engineer, those are the true drivers of economic growth. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is a quick roadmap of what we'll cover today. First, defining human capital. Second, the sources of human capital. Third, capital versus human development. Fourth, India's great prospects. Fifth, the education sector. And finally, future prospects.
All right, Section 1, defining human capital. What exactly does it mean?
This is honestly a brilliant way to wrap your head around the concept. Picture a physical asset, like a bus. It's tangible, it can be bought, sold, and crucially, it is completely separable from its owner. The owner of the bus doesn't even need to be in the same time zone when the bus is operating. Now, contrast that with human capital. This is entirely intangible. Think of the bus driver's skill and their knowledge of the local roads. That skill is built right into the body and mind of the driver. It is completely inseparable from its owner. You can only sell these services of human capital, meaning the driver actually has to be present to drive the bus.
And that brings us to the formal definition. Human capital formation is the process of acquiring and expanding the number of competent, educated, and experienced people essential to economic development. Just think about the time, the energy, and the money you spent on your own degree or training. You weren't just spending cash, right? You were actively engaging in human capital formation. You were building an intangible asset within yourself.
Let's move along to Section 2, the sources of human capital. Where does all this actually come from?
Well, the source material identifies these 5 key pillars. Education is pretty widely acknowledged as the root of human capital formation. It is the most powerful way to build a fruitful workforce. But education alone just isn't enough. Health is equally vital. A healthy person is obviously more productive and prevents the spread of diseases. Then you have on-the-job training, which bridges that gap between formal classroom education and actual productivity in a real-world firm. Information, like knowing where the best jobs or schools actually are, makes sure this capital is utilized efficiently. But let's look a little closer at that 4th pillar because it usually surprises people.
Believe it or not, migration is a direct source of human capital formation. Whether it's an unemployed worker moving from a rural village to a big urban center, or a highly skilled software engineer moving to a whole new country for a better opportunity. Yes, it requires an upfront cost for transportation and living expenses, but because the increased income and opportunities in that new location far exceed those initial costs, the very act of moving is literally an investment in maximizing human potential.
Which brings us to Section 3, capital versus human development. Time for a bit of a philosophical pivot.
Now, what's really interesting here is the shift in perspective. The strict concept of human capital treats human beings as a means to an end. The end goal is just increased economic productivity. From that strict view, if an investment in education doesn't result in higher output, well, it's considered unproductive. But on the flip side, human development argues that humans are an end in themselves. It suggests that having the ability to read, to write, and to lead a long, healthy life, that is fundamentally valuable for human well-being all on its own, regardless of whether it immediately spikes GDP. Ultimately, true national progress requires a balance of both these perspectives.
All right, Section 4, India's great prospects. Let's talk about the macroeconomic stakes.
Take a second to just absorb this number, 65%. Out of 1.4 billion people, 65% are under the age of 35. This is India's famous demographic dividend. But listen, this isn't just a fun piece of trivia. These are dramatic stakes. It is a ticking clock. If this massive youth population is properly educated, healthy, and skilled, they become an absolutely unstoppable demographic asset. But if they are left unskilled and underemployed, it becomes a monumental missed opportunity.
And, India actually recognized this potential a long time ago. The 7th five-year plan explicitly stated
Trained and educated on sound lines, a large population can itself become an asset in accelerating economic growth. So, human resource development has basically always been identified as the key strategy for ensuring social change and accelerating the economy.
So, the crucial question is, where does India actually stand right now? Well, the World Bank's Human Capital Index for India in 2020 was 0.49. To put that into perspective, this score trails peers like China. A relatively low score like this highlights some very real deficiencies, things like rote learning, employability gaps, and systemic inequities. If India is going to realize that vision of Vikasit Bharat by 2047 and become a $30 trillion knowledge economy, bringing this HCI score up is absolutely the most critical barrier to overcome.
Let's move to Section 5, the education sector, the ultimate engine of change.
To understand where we are going, it helps to see where India started. Think back to the time of independence. With tented outdoor classrooms being common around 1950, the absolute number of illiterate people was staggering. Since then, the expansion has been massive. We've gone from just over 200,000 elementary schools in 1950 to nearly 1.3 million today. The sheer scale of building the physical infrastructure for human capital over the last 70 years is truly mind-blowing.
Let's trace that steady, long-term evolution. Back in 1950, the Constitution outlined a grand vision for education for all. We saw significant policy frameworks established in 1986. But the real modern paradigm shift? That happened recently with the launch of the National Education Policy, or NEP, in 2020. This policy replaces a 3-decade-old framework, and it is explicitly designed to be the launchpad to reach that 2047 target of the Vikasit Bharat, shifting India into a true knowledge-driven society.
But, as we all know, ambitious policies require serious funding, and here we see a real point of friction. The NEP 2020 ambitiously targets spending 6% of the national GDP on education to fund vital things like digital infrastructure, new technology, and advanced research. However, actual current expenditure hovers around 3 to 4.6%. So there is a very real gap between the desired vision and the current financial reality. Sustainable transformation is absolutely going to require closing that funding gap.
But even with those funding challenges, the structural goals of the NEP 2020 are, well, they're revolutionary. It is completely shifting the focus away from old-school rote memorization and towards real critical thinking. It introduces a new 5+3+3+4 curricular structure, integrates vocational training way earlier, and pushes heavily for multidisciplinary skills. The vision here is to prepare students not for the jobs of yesterday, but for a global workforce that will be dominated by artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, and complex climate science.
Finally, Section 6, Future Prospects. Let's look at the roadblocks ahead.
We do have to neutrally acknowledge the serious systemic inefficiencies that are still out there. First is brain drain, the migration of highly skilled, rare talent like doctors and engineers to other countries. That represents a huge loss of investment for India. Second, rapid population growth continuously strains per-head facilities, impacting everything from sanitation to housing to schools. And third, a severe employment gap. Data shows that up to 30% of graduates in rural areas remain unemployed. That points to a really painful mismatch between just holding a degree and actually possessing employable skills. Without addressing these specific inefficiencies, that much-talked-about demographic dividend could easily stumble.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer and, honestly, right back to you. As India navigates these massive macroeconomic shifts to build a $30 trillion knowledge economy, the concept of human capital isn't just about big national policy. It is highly personal. So, how are you investing in your own human capital? Your education, your health, your continuous learning to prep for this AI-driven future? It's something to really chew on. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this. Keep learning, keep investing in yourself, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.